I've lived through storms before, real ones that tore through small-town Texas with winds that could rip a roof clean off. But nothing prepared me for the storm that came not from the sky, but from people I trusted. My name is Margaret Maggie Holloway, and I'm 58 years old. If you're watching this, you might be a woman like me past the halfway mark of life, with more wrinkles than we care to count and a heart that's carried both joy and pain. You've worked, you've raised children, you've buried loved ones, and maybe you've wondered if the hardest parts of your story are behind you. Well, I'm here to tell you, you never know when life will deliver a blow that takes your breath away, or when you'll discover that the very ground you've been standing on was nothing but a trapdoor waiting to give way. Because the baby I raised as my granddaughter, she wasn't mine. She wasn't Lily's either. She was switched at birth, stolen by wealth, by deceit, by betrayal so cruel I still wake up sometimes gasping for air. And yet, somehow, that betrayal didn't destroy me. It became the very thing that pushed me to rise. Let me take you back. Before the scandal, before the lies, before the heartbreak, I was just Maggie, widowed, too young, mother to one bright, beautiful daughter named Lily. She was the kind of girl who could light up a room just by walking in. Auburn hair like mine, freckles across her nose, laughter that sounded like church bells on a Sunday morning. She was my pride, my joy, my reason to keep going when the nights were long and the bills stacked too high. We weren't rich, but we had love. And in a world like this, that's worth more than gold. Lily was in her 20s when she told me she was expecting. I'll never forget the way she stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she held out that little plastic test, tears brimming in her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." I pulled her into my arms, held her the way I did when she was 5 and afraid of thunderstorms. "Of course you can," I said. "You've got me. You'll always have me." I didn't care that she wasn't married. I didn't care that the father, her rich boyfriend, Daniel Whitmore, came from a family that looked down their noses at women like us. All I cared about was that my daughter was bringing new life into this world. But then everything went wrong. It was a stormy night when Lily went into labor. I remember racing to the hospital, clutching my worn-out Bible in my hand, praying harder than I'd ever prayed. Hours passed, the hallways echoing with the sound of rushing nurses, the smell of antiseptic stinging my nose. And then the doctor came out, his face pale. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "We did everything we could. The baby's fine, but your daughter didn't make it." Those words split me open. My knees buckled. My throat burned with screams I couldn't swallow. My Lily, my only child. Gone. The baby, my grandbaby, was placed in my arms hours later. She was tiny, swaddled in pink, her little fists clenched as if she knew already the fight she'd have in this world. I named her Grace because I knew only God's grace could carry me through. And from that night on, I poured every ounce of love I had into her. For years, I believed Grace was Lily's daughter, my granddaughter, the last piece of my child I could hold. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to give her what she needed. I patched her dresses, baked cookies for her class parties, stayed up late sewing Halloween costumes. At night, when exhaustion made my body ache, I'd rock her to sleep and whisper, "You are loved. You are wanted. You are mine." But here's the thing about lies. They don't stay buried forever. 18 years later, on the cusp of Grace's adulthood, the truth clawed its way into the light, a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew. It's truth that revealed Daniel Whitmore. That rich boyfriend with a perfect smile and polished shoes had stolen more than my daughter's heart. He had stolen my granddaughter. The baby I raised, the baby I thought was Lily's, wasn't ours at all. She was switched at birth, and the real grandchild I should have raised. She had been living a different life all along. That's where my story begins, ladies, in betrayal, in heartbreak, in the kind of pain that can make you believe life is over. But I'm here to tell you it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight that tested every skill, every lesson, every ounce of grit I'd gathered in 58 years, and it was the start of my greatest triumph. Because betrayal may break your heart, but it can also sharpen your wisdom. And wisdom, that's the weapon no one can steal from you. So stay with me, because this isn't just a story about what was taken from me. It's a story about what I asked. A story about what I reclaimed it. It's a story about how I turned betrayal into victory. And maybe it's a story that will remind you that your best years aren't behind you. They're right here, waiting. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I want to hear your story. When the world yanked the rug out from under me. When the truth about Grace's birth nearly split me in two, I didn't crumble completely. And I'll tell you why. Because long before betrayal touched my life, I learned how to survive. I was born in 1965 in a speck of a Texas town called Willow Creek. You could drive through it in 15 minutes flat, but to me, it was the whole world. Dirt roads, cattle grazing in pastures, football games under floodlights. And the sky so wide it made you feel small but safe at the same time. My daddy Earl was a farmer through and through. His hands were calloused, his back bent from years behind a plow, but his eyes were steady as stone. He used to say, "Maggie, the land doesn't owe you a thing. You owe it sweat, patience, and respect. Only then will it give you something back." Mama, Ruth, was the opposite, sharp as a tack, quick with her tongue, and never afraid to stand up for what was right. She ran the household with grit and humor, keeping us fed even when money was thin and the harvest was mean. She'd wag her finger at me and say, "Child, this world will test you. Don't cry when it does. Plant something new." Those two voices, Daddy's steady patience and Mama's fierce grit, were the soil. I grew in. Life on the farm wasn't easy. Summers meant blistering heat, dust choking the air, and praying for rain. Winters meant patching old coats and huddling near the wood stove when the north winds howled. By the time I was 10, I could milk a cow, mend a fence, and cook supper for 6 with nothing but beans, cornbread, and determination. I remember one drought in particular. The ground cracked, the crops withered, and Daddy's shoulders slumped lower each day. I was 12 when I caught him sitting alone in the barn, his head in his hands. It scared me seeing my rock of a father look so broken. I didn't know what to do. So I brought him a glass of water and said, "Daddy, Mama says if the harvest fails, we just plant something else." He looked at me for a long time, then chuckled through his tears. Your mother's daughter, Maggie?" That moment stuck with me, because I realized survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about the choice to keep moving, even when the ground under you gives nothing back. By high school, I'd already had my share of knocks. I wasn't the prettiest girl or the richest, but I had fire in me. Once, a girl named Carla made fun of my patched jeans, calling me Raggedy Maggie. I could have fought her, but instead I challenged her to a debate in history class. The topic: women's right to vote. I poured every ounce of passion into my argument. When the class clapped, Carla turned red as a beet. She never called me names again. That day I learned something important. Brains outlast fists, and words, when used right, are sharper than knives. After graduation, I left Willow Creek with nothing but a suitcase, a scholarship, and my mama's old cast-iron skillet. Austin was booming, alive with music and opportunity. I worked as a waitress while studying business. Long nights on my feet, grease burns on my arms. The smell of barbecue soaked into my clothes. But I smiled through it, pocketed every tip, and saved every dime. Customers underestimated me all the time. Men would call me darlin' and whistle when I walked past with a tray. But I learned to read people who'd tip big, who'd stiff me, who was itching for a fight. That instinct, it stayed with me for life. By my late 20s, I'd built a small real estate hustle. Nothing glamorous, just flipping old houses, patching roofs, painting walls, and selling them to families who dreamed of owning a home. I wasn't rolling in cash, but I was proud. Proud that I could take something broken and make it whole again. Funny how that skill fixing what's broken would become the very thing that saved me later. Then life handed me Lily, my daughter, my light. I won't roll too far ahead. You'll hear more about her in the next part. But I'll say this: every hardship I endured, every lesson from Mama and Daddy, Every late night and busted knucklelet was all practice. Practice for the day. I need to stand tall after burying my only child, because when betrayal came, when the Whitmores tried to steal everything from me, I'd already been forged by years of storms, and I want you to hear me on this. Ladies, the trials you've faced in your own lives, the hard days, the lonely nights, the losses, they weren't wasted. They were training for the battles you didn't know were coming. So when your world cracks open, and at some point it will, don't think you're starting from zero. You're starting from strength, from wisdom, from survival you've already proven. And that survival. It's the reason I'm standing here. It's telling you my story today. If you're watching this right now, I want you to pause and remember your roots. Think of the women who came before you, the mothers. It's the grandmothers, the neighbors, the teachers who taught you how to stand tall. Their voices are still inside you. It's just like mama and daddy's are in me. And when life tests, if you on it, those voices will be the hands that lift you up now. Let me take you into the chapter of my life that still makes my chest ache to remember. The chapter where my daughter, Lily, walked into the world of womanhood, full of dreams and fear, and changed my life forever. If I close my eyes, I can still see Lily at 5 years old, running barefoot through the yard with her curls bouncing, her laughter ringing out like music. I can still hear the way she'd say, "Mama, look," every time she caught a butterfly or picked a wildflower, as if the whole world was brand new and she was the one showing it to me. Raising Lily was the purest joy I've ever known. And Lord knows it wasn't always easy. I was a single mother, widowed too soon after her daddy died in a work accident. Money was tight, my hours were long, and sometimes the bills stacked higher than I wanted Lily to ever see. But I made a promise to myself the day she was born, she would know love, no matter what else she lacked in love we had in abundance. Lily was a bright child, sharp as a whip. She could memorize whole poems by the time she was in 2nd grade. But what struck me most wasn't her smartset, was her heart. She'd share her lunch with kids who didn't have enough, bring home stray kittens, and write notes for me when she saw me tired. "You're the best mama ever." At night, we'd sit at the kitchen table, me balancing the checkbook while she scribbled pictures of houses with big windows and flower gardens. One day, she'd say, "I'll live in a house like this, and you'll have the room right next to mine." I'd smile, pretending my eyes weren't wet. "I'll hold you to that, baby." By high school, Lily had blossomed into the kind of young woman who made heads turn, but not just for her beauty. She had a spirit about her. Teachers said she had leadership in her bones. Friends said she was loyal to a fault. To me, she was still my baby girl, even when she stood taller than me. Wearing my old heels around the house, she had dreams of being a nurse. Said she wanted to help people the way the small-town nurses helped her grandpa before he passed. But money was a wall we couldn't climb. Lord knows, I tried to save enough for college. But between the mortgage and groceries, the pennies slipped away. Still, Lily never made me feel guilty. She got a job at the diner down the road, working late shifts and coming home smelling like French fries and vanilla milkshakes. She'd drop her tips into a coffee can labeled Future Fund. "Mama," she'd say, "we'll figure it out." We always do. That was Lily, hopeful, practical, steady as stone. And then she met Daniel Whitmore. He was tall, polished, the kind of boy whose family name opened doors. The Whitmores were old money in Texas, oil, land, politics. They lived in a house with marble floors and chandeliers. It's the kind of place Lily used to draw on her notebooks. At first I was wary. Boys like Daniel didn't usually look twice at girls like Lily. But he did. Or at least he made it seem that way. He brought her flowers, took her to fancy restaurants, promised her the world. I could see the stars in her eyes, the way her heart opened wide for him. And part of me wanted to believe he could love her the way she deserved. But another part of me, the part forged by years of hard knocks, saw shadows. Daniel's smile never reached his eyes. He avoided me when he could, treating me polite but distant, like I was someone beneath him. He gave Lily expensive gifts she didn't ask for. But when she talked about her dreams, her nursing, her future, he'd change the subject. Still, Lily was in love. And when she came to me, trembling one night with that little test in her hand, I knew her life was about to change forever. She sat at the kitchen table, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mama," she whispered, "I don't know what to do. Daniel, he says his family won't approve. He says he doesn't know if he's ready." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Baby girl, look at me. You are stronger than you think, and you are not alone. You've got me." She sobbed into my arms, and I held her the way I did when she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. I didn't care about Daniel's hesitations or his family's money. What I cared about was my daughter and the new life growing inside her. "You can do this," I told her. "We can do this." Pregnancy wasn't easy for Lily. She was sick more often than not, exhausted from working shifts at the diner, juggling Daniel's hot and cold moods. Some days he'd show up with flowers. Other days he'd disappear for weeks, blaming family obligations. I worried. But Lily kept saying, "Mama, it'll be okay. He'll come around." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe love could soften the edges of wealth and pride. But deep down, a knot of fear sat in my chest. Still, every time Lily placed my hand on her belly and I felt that little kick, hope bloomed inside me. That baby was our future, our miracle, our chance to start fresh. I didn't know then that fate had something crueler in store. I didn't know that the night Lily went into labor would be the last night I'd ever hear her voice, or that the baby placed in my arms wasn't the grandchild I thought she was. But I'll never forget the way Lily looked at me during her last hours. Her face pale, her eyes full of love and fear, whispering, "Take care of her. Mama, please take care of my baby." And I promised I would. I promised with every ounce of my soul. Ladies, sometimes the promises we make in love carry us through the darkest valleys. I didn't know the truth back then. All I knew was that I had a grandbaby to raise and I'd give her the life Lily dreamed of. But promises can be tested. And mine was tested in ways I could never have imagined, in ways that would shake the very ground beneath me. I still remember the night like it was carved into my skin. A Texas summer night, humid, sticky, the kind that makes the air feel heavy with something you can't quite name. Lily had been restless all day, pacing the small living room, pressing her hand to her swollen belly. She tried to laugh it off, but I could see it in her eyes. The time had come. "Mama," she whispered, clutching my arm, "I think it's happening." I grabbed the bag we'd packed weeks earlier, my hands trembling. We drove to the hospital, the headlights cutting through the dark, Lily breathing in sharp, shallow bursts beside me. I kept whispering, "It's going to be all right, baby girl. You're strong. You can do this." But in my heart, fear was already clawing its way in at the hospital. They wheeled her back while I filled out forms, my mind buzzing with half-formed prayers. "Please, Lord, please don't take her from me." Hours crawled by. I sat in that waiting room, staring at the clock on the wall, each tick echoing like a hammer. Families came and went, some with balloons, some with flowers. I sat alone, wringing my hands, waiting for news. Finally, a nurse came out. Her face was pale, her voice too careful. "Are you Maggie?" she asked softly. "Yes," I whispered. My throat was dry. She took my hand, and I knew before she said a word, "I'm so sorry. There were complications. We did everything we could, but Lily didn't make it." The world went silent. Just silent. My body felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out of me. My baby girl. My Lily. Gone. I don't even remember standing. Don't remember screaming. But I must have, 'cause another nurse was holding me, whispering, "You have to be strong." For the baby. My legs carried me, though I don't know how, to the nursery where a tiny bundle lay in a bassinet. She was so small, her skin soft and pink. Her little fists curled tight. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, "That's her. That's Lily's baby." And just like that, grief and love collided inside me. They placed the baby in my arms, and something shifted. She was warm, fragile, smelling faintly of milk and powder. She opened her eyes deep, searching eyes, and in that moment, I felt Lily's presence. I felt her saying, "Mama, take care of her, please." I kissed that baby's forehead and made a vow I will never forget. "You'll never go without love. Not as long as I'm breathing. I promised your mama. I'll keep that promise." I named her Grace because that's what she was, God's grace in the middle of heartbreak. Daniel showed up hours later. His face was pale, his expensive suit wrinkled. For a moment, I thought grief had broken him too. But then I saw something else in his eyes, panic, not sorrow. He barely looked at me, barely looked at the baby. "She's gone?" he asked, his voice sharp clipped. I nodded, clutching Grace tighter. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath. Something about his family. Something about this ruining everything. I wanted to scream at him. "Your daughter is dead. Don't you dare talk about ruin like it's about you." But I bit my tongue. I had Grace to think about. Still, something inside me shifted that day. A seed of suspicion took root, though I couldn't name it yet. The funeral was the hardest day of my life. I buried my child in a simple dress she loved, laid lilies across her casket, and sang the hymn she used to hum while washing dishes. People said time would dull the pain. They lied. But every time I looked at Grace, I found the strength to take one more step, to breathe one more breath. I told myself, I can't give up. Lily's baby needs me. What I didn't know, what no one told me, was that Grace wasn't mine, not by blood. The truth was waiting, buried under lies and betrayal, ready to tear my world apart again. But back then, all I saw was a baby who needed love, and I gave her everything. The days after Lily's funeral blurred together, like one long stretch of gray sky. I would wake to the sound of Grace's cries, and for a moment, I'd forget. I'd think Lily was still in the next room, ready to come running. But then it would hit me all over again. She was gone. And yet, in that tiny baby's cry, I found my anchor, feeding her at 2 a.m., rocking her in the same chair I'd rocked Lily in as a baby. I whispered stories of her mama. Your mama loved sunflowers. She had this way of making people laugh, even when the world felt heavy. She'd have loved you more than life itself. Grace would wrap her tiny hand around my finger, and I'd swear I felt Lily in that touch. Those first years weren't easy. I was in my late 50s, body aching in ways it hadn't before. Diaper changes at 3 a.m., chasing a toddler around the yard. Juggling doctor visits and bills, it all felt like climbing a mountain with no rest stops. There were moments I broke down in the kitchen, whispering, "Lord, I can't do this. I'm too old, too tired." But then Grace would toddle in, grinning with jelly smeared across her cheeks. And I'd remember why I had to keep going. I picked up sewing work again, mending dresses for the church ladies, babysitting for neighbors, even cleaning houses when I had to. Pride had no place in survival. I'd remind myself, Clara Reynolds' daughter doesn't quit. Not now, not ever, Daniel. He drifted in and out like a ghost. Some months he'd visit, always in a hurry, always dressed sharp. He'd hold Grace for a few minutes, hand me an envelope with some cash, then disappear again. Other times he'd vanish for weeks. No calls, no support. When I'd press him, he'd mutter something about business meetings or family obligations. At first I excused it. Grief makes men act strange, I told myself. Maybe he just couldn't handle the reminders of Lily. But there was something in his eyes when he looked at Grace, something guarded, something I couldn't quite name. Still, I pushed the thought aside. I was too busy surviving. Grace grew fast. By the time she was 3, she had Lily's laugh, bright and contagious, bouncing off the walls of my little kitchen. By 5, she was asking questions about her mama, her daddy, about why it was just the two of us most of the time. I'd tell her, "Your mama's in heaven, sweetheart. And your daddy. He's busy. But you've got me. And I'll never leave you." She'd hug me tight and say, "You're the best grandma and mama." And I'd cry in the bathroom later, 'cause she deserved more. The town had mixed opinions about us. Some whispered behind my back, wondering why Daniel wasn't stepping up more. Others pitied me, an old woman raising a child alone. But there were also women strong, weathered women like me who slipped notes of encouragement into my purse, who said, "You're not alone. We've carried babies that weren't ours too. Blood isn't the only thing that makes a family." Those words carried me on nights when exhaustion tried to drown me. Grace started school at 6, marching in with pigtails and a pink backpack that nearly swallowed her whole. I sat in my car afterward and sobbed, not just because she was growing up, but because Lily wasn't there to see it. I threw myself into being at every school event, every recital, every scraped knee. I wasn't just raising a child. I was raising a promise, and still. Daniel's shadow loomed. He sent expensive gifts, sometimes a dollhouse too big for my tiny living room. Designer clothes a child had no business wearing. The gifts never matched his absence. And Grace noticed. "Grandma," she'd ask, frowning, "why doesn't Daddy come to see me? Doesn't he love me?" That question broke me every time. I'd smile through the ache and say, "Of course he loves you, baby. He just doesn't always know how to show it. But you don't ever forget you are loved deeply." And she'd nod, accepting it, for a while, but beneath the surface. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sometimes when Daniel did visit, he'd ask strange questions. "How's her health? Any issues? Does she look like Lily to you?" I bristle at that. Of course she does. She's her spitting image. But he'd just nod, distracted. Like his mind was elsewhere. I didn't know it then. But those questions were cracks in the foundation of the lie he'd built. Cracks that one day would split wide open. Because as much as I loved that little girl, as much as I poured my whole soul into raising her, the truth was waiting in the dark. Grace wasn't mine. Not by blood, not by fate, but by betrayal. And that betrayal would come crashing into our lives before long testing. Every ounce of strength I had left, Grace was 10. When she first asked the question, I had been dreading. We were sitting at the kitchen table, her homework spread out between us. She had Lily's determined look on her face, the one she wore when she was trying to solve a math problem. But instead of numbers, her question cut me to the bone. "Grandma," she said, her voice small, "why don't I look like Mama in the pictures?" I froze, pen in my hand hovering above her worksheet. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She pushed a photo across the Tabala picture of Lily at 12. Her hair golden, eyes green as the spring grass in Willow Creek. Grace had darker hair, almost black, and her eyes were a deep, stormy brown. She had green eyes. Yours are green. Daddy's are green. Mine are. Not. Her little fingers traced the photo. Her face clouded with confusion. Children notice more than we think. I reached across the table, cupping her chin. "Honey, families come in all kinds of mixes. Sometimes kids don't look exactly like their parents. But what matters is what's in here." I tapped her chest gently. "You've got your mama's laugh, her fire, her heart. And that's what counts." She seemed satisfied for the moment. But inside, my stomach twisted, because I'd noticed it too. The older Grace got, the more questions came. Why did her father only show up once in a while? Why did he look at her like she was a stranger sometimes? Why did her cousins, Daniel's nieces and nephews, never invite her to family gatherings? I had no good answers. Just patched up words that bought us time. Daniel didn't help. His visits became less frequent, his calls more curt. But when he did appear, he always brought something expensive: an iPad, pair of sneakers that cost more than my rent, a necklace that sparkled under the kitchen light. It didn't add up. The gifts were grand, but the man behind them felt absent, detached. Sometimes I caught him watching Grace like he was studying her, as though she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. And every time it sent a chill through me. Grace, for her part, was growing into herself. By middle school, she was whip-smart, quick-witted, and strong-willed, just like her mama. She joined the school choir, loved painting sunflowers, and had a stubborn streak that reminded me so much of Lily I'd sometimes have to step out of the room to catch my breath. But she also carried a sadness she didn't always show. I heard it in the way she sighed when father-daughter dances came around and she had no one to take her. I saw it in the way she lingered over photos of Lily, touching her mama's face like she was trying to memorize every detail. "Grandma," she whispered one night, curled up in bed beside me, "do you think Mama would be proud of me?" I hugged her tight, fighting back tears. "Oh, honey, she'd be over the moon. You're everything she dreamed of and more. Her smile that night was worth every sacrifice I had ever made. Then came the moment that cracked everything open. Grace was 13 when a school project sent her digging into family history. She came home with a chart asking for names, birthplaces, health history. I rattled off the Reynolds side, easily farmers, teachers, hard workers. When she asked about Daniel's family, I gave her what little I knew. Wealthy, old money. Not the kind of people who ever welcomed me. She frowned. "Don't you have pictures of Daddy's side?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. They've always kept their distance," but she wouldn't let it go. That project lit a fire in her. She started asking Daniel directly, calling him, texting him. And that's when I noticed the panic in his responses. Short, clipped, evasive. "I'll explain later. Don't worry about that. Some things are better left alone." Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. One night after Grace had gone to bed, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single piece of paper, a photocopy of a birth record. Grace's birth record. Only. It wasn't hers. The name, the date, the hospital all matched. But the baby listed wasn't Grace. It was another child. A different name, and there, scrawled at the bottom in messy handwriting. "Were the words?" asked Daniel. I sat at my kitchen table that night, heart pounding. The truth circling me like a predator. I couldn't see Grace was mine in every way that mattered. I had fed her, bathed her, kissed her skinned knees, held her through every nightmare. But suddenly, the question I had buried for years clawed its way back up. Who was this child I'd raised? And what had Daniel done? The truth was coming for me, and it was going to break everything I thought I knew. I sat at my kitchen table all night, the birth record staring back at me like a ghost. The paper shook in my hands as I read the name over and over, my mind refusing to accept it. It wasn't Grace's name. It wasn't Lily's baby. I felt like the floor had dropped out beneath me. Everything I'd built my life around, my promise to Lily, the years of raising Grace. The nights I'd held her against my chest suddenly teetered on the edge of a lie. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones. But one thing burned clear. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to get them. I drove to Daniel's office in the city. His glass building loomed tall, polished, arrogant, just like him. I marched past the receptionist, ignoring her protests, and pushed open his office door. He was sitting behind a mahogany desk, tie loosened, eyes widening as he saw the paper in my hand. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. He leaned back in his chair, trying to look calm, but I saw the flicker of panic. "About what?" he asked coolly. I slammed the paper on his desk. "About this. About my granddaughter. About what you did." His face drained of color. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I was hoping you'd never find out," he muttered. My knees nearly buckled. "So it's true. You switched the babies." He looked up at me, something sharp and desperate in his eyes. "You don't understand, Maggie. My family, my father, he would have disowned me if they knew Lily had my child. She wasn't. She wasn't their kind of woman." I stared at him, disbelief choking me. "Their kind of woman?" She was your daughter's mother. She loved you." His jaw tightened. Love wasn't enough. If word got out, I would have lost everything. The inheritance, the business, the trust fund. So when Lily, he swallowed, avoiding my gaze. When Lily didn't make it, I made a choice. My stomach turned. You gave me another woman's child. And you let Grace believe she was Lily's daughter. Daniel's voice was cold now, defensive. I gave you a child who needed a home, and you raised her well. What difference does it make whose blood runs in her veins? I slammed my fist on his desk, anger boiling over. It makes every difference. You stole her life. You stole mine. You let me bury my daughter and cling to a promise that was built on a lie. He stood now, hands gripping the desk, eyes blazing. I did what I had to do to protect myself. And you should be thanking me. Without me, you'd have nothing. Nothing. I hissed. I have Grace, and she is everything. But when she finds out, when she learns the truth, it won't be me she hates. It'll be you. His face faltered then, just for a second. But he covered it quickly, straightening his tie. You tell her, he said coldly, and you'll ruin her. That girl loves you. She believes she's Lily's daughter. Rip that away, and you'll break her spirit. Are you ready to live with that? The words cut deep, because he wasn't entirely wrong. Grace's whole identity was wrapped up in Lily's memory. Telling her the truth would shatter her, but keeping the lie, that would shatter me. I walked out of that office trembling, my heart in pieces. I drove home, tears blurring the road, whispering prayers into the steering wheel. Lord, what do I do? How do I protect her? How do I keep my promise to Lily when the truth threatens to destroy us both? When I walked into the house, Grace came running, waving a painting she'd made at school. A sunflower, Lily's favorite. Do you like it, Grandma? She beamed. I dropped to my knees, hugging her so tight she squealed. I love it, baby. More than anything in that moment, I knew Daniel's lies might have stolen the truth from us. But he would not steal my love for that girl. Grace was mine. Maybe not by blood, but by every sacrifice. Every sleepless night, every prayer whispered into the dark, and I would protect her, no matter what, even if it meant going to war with Daniel. The weeks after confronting Daniel were the hardest of my life. I carried the truth like a stone in my chest, heavy and unmovable. Every time Grace looked at me with those trusting brown eyes, I felt the weight of the lie between us. But I also knew this. Daniel wasn't going to win. Not this time. He had stolen my daughter, stolen my peace. And now he thought he could hold my granddaughter hostage inside a lie. But if there was one thing life on the farm had taught me, it was this. When a storm comes, you don't run. You brace yourself, and you fight to protect what's yours. So I started planning. I began with the basics. Paperwork. Records. I went back to the hospital where Grace was born, requesting every file, every scrap of paper from that night. Some clerks rolled their eyes, others tried to brush me off, but I wouldn't budge. My daughter died here, I said firmly, and I need every detail for her child's sake. After weeks of persistence, a box of files landed in my lap. Inside, I found discrepancies, 2 babies born minutes apart. Both listed under Daniel's last name in one version, only one in another. A nurse's signature scratched out, rewritten. It was messy. Suspicious.evidence.next. I turned to the community. Hospitals are like small towns people talk. Over endless cups of coffee with retired nurses and orderlies, I began piecing together memories. One woman, a night shift nurse, remembered Daniel storming through the halls the night Lily died. He wasn't acting like a grieving father, she said softly. He was making calls, pacing, barking orders. I always thought it was strange. Another mentioned a supervisor who'd retired suddenly a month after the birth. Paid off. It was starting to smell that way. Each story added a thread, weaving a net I could eventually tighten around Daniel. Meanwhile, I played the part of the doting grandmother. To Grace, nothing had changed. I cheered at her school choir concerts, helped with homework, packed lunches with handwritten notes, but inside, I was sharpening my resolve like a blade. I kept a locked drawer in my bedroom, hidden beneath old quilts. Inside, I stored the birth record, the hospital files, every note from the nurses. Proof of Daniel's betrayal. One day, Grace would need to know. And when that day came, I'd make sure the truth stood taller than Daniel's lies. But Daniel wasn't blind. He noticed my silence after our confrontation. He noticed I no longer begged for his help, no longer softened my words when he showed up. And he didn't like it. One evening, he came by unannounced. Grace was upstairs practicing piano, her sweet notes floating through the house. Daniel leaned in close, his voice low and threatening. "You think you're clever, Maggie? Digging around in the past. Let me remind you, if you expose me, you don't just ruin me. You ruin her. Do you really want Grace to grow up knowing she doesn't belong to you or Lily? Think about the damage, Maggie. Think carefully." I met his stare, my hands steady though my heart raced. "The damage was done the day you stole her from her real mama. And one day she'll know the truth. Whether you like it or not," he sneered, straightened his suit, and left without another word. But I could feel it in my bones. The war between us had begun. That night I sat on the porch long after Grace went to bed, the stars glittering above me. I thought of Lily, her laugh, her stubborn spirit. The way she never backed down from a fight. "Baby girl," I whispered into the night. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. But I promised you I'd raise her. I promised I'd protect her. And I will, even if it costs me everything." The breeze rustled through the trees, and for just a moment, I felt Lily there. Strong, steady, I wasn't alone. And Daniel had no idea who he was up against. Life has a way of exposing cracks, no matter how carefully you try to seal them. And in Daniel's perfect, polished world, the cracks were spreading. It began with whispers. Business associates pulling out of deals, stories of financial missteps leaking into the community. Daniel was scrambling to keep his empire afloat. And desperation made him sloppy. And when powerful men get sloppy, the whole world starts watching. Grace noticed the tension before I said a word. One evening, she curled up beside me on the couch, her head resting against my shoulder as we watched an old movie. "Grandma," she said softly, "why does Grandpa Daniel always look at you like he's mad?" I froze, forcing a smile. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She lifted her head, eyes narrowed the way Lily's used to when she was digging for truth. "Every time he visits you to whisper. You think I don't hear, but I do. And then you come back looking sad." I kissed her forehead, my throat tight. "Some people carry heavy secrets, Grace, and it makes them act mean. But you don't need to worry about that. You just focus on being the bright star you are." But her words pierced me. She was old enough now to sense the shadows, and shadows once noticed only grow darker. Meanwhile, Daniel began making his moves. He called me one afternoon, his voice sharp. "You're poisoning her against me, Maggie." I laughed bitterly. "I don't have to. She sees you for what you are, all on her own." His reply was cold, calculated. "If you keep pushing, I'll file for custody. I'll take her from you legally. You think a judge will side with a broke widow over me? I have the money, the lawyers, the power." For a moment, panic clawed at my chest. He wasn't bluffing. Money could buy anything in his world. But then I thought of my locked drawer, the hospital records, the nurses' stories. "Try it," I whispered into the phone. "Because once I open my mouth in court, the whole world will know the kind of man you are. And believe me, Daniel, you won't survive the scandal." Silence stretched. Then he hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by Grace's bed watching her breathe, her small hand curled under her cheek. I thought of the day Lily had brought her into the world. The day I'd promised to protect her. Was I protecting her by keeping the secret? Or was I just protecting myself from the fallout? The truth pressed heavier and heavier on my chest. The unraveling came to a head. One Sunday morning, Grace and I were leaving church when a woman stopped us. She was older, her eyes kind but curious. "Is this your granddaughter?" she asked. I smiled proudly. "Yes, this is Grace." The woman tilted her head. She looked so much like the Johnson family. You know, Daniel's cousins. Same eyes, same smile. It's uncanny. My stomach twisted. Grace beamed, waving goodbye to the woman. But I saw the question flicker in her eyes. "Grandma," she whispered as we walked to the car, "why do people always say I look like Daniel's family?" I thought I looked like Mama. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Because here it was, the moment I'd been dreading. The lie was unraveling, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. That night, I sat alone on the porch, staring into the dark. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling. I knew what Lily would tell me if she were here. She'd tell me the truth always finds its way out. And when it does, it's better to face it with courage than to let it explode in silence. The time was coming. I could feel it soon. Grace would know everything, and our lives would never be the same. Secrets are like water behind a dam. You can patch the cracks, reinforce the walls, but eventually the pressure becomes too much. And when it bursts, nothing can stop the flood. The flood came on a Tuesday. Grace had been quieter than usual all week. She kept watching me with those curious, searching eyes, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't know how to name. That afternoon, I found her in my room, sitting on the floor with my locked drawer open. My heart nearly stopped. She was holding the hospital record in her hands. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what is this?" My knees gave out, and I sat down beside her, tears already stinging my eyes. "Where did you find the key?" I asked softly. She held it up, her little fingers shaking. "It was under your pillow." I wasn't snooping now. I wanted to know why everyone says I look like Daniel. And then I found this. She looked at me then, her eyes wide and wet. "Grandma, am I Mama's daughter or not?" The dam inside me broke. I pulled her into my arms, rocking her the way I had when she was small. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to have a simple childhood. To believe you belonged to the mother who loved you so much." She pushed back, desperate. "Tell me the truth. Please, Grandma. I can take it." So I told her about Lily. How she had been so young, so in love. How her life had been cut short the day she brought Grace into the world. I told her about Daniel, his pride, his lies, his betrayal. And finally, told her the part I'd kept locked in my heart for 14 years. You weren't Lily's baby. Grace. Daniel switched you at birth. I don't know who your real mother was. All I know is that when I held you in my arms, I felt Lily's spirit telling me to love you. And I did. I do. You are mine no matter what. The room went silent except for her sobs. She buried her face in my chest, her tears soaking through my shirt. For the first time in her life, she looked at me not with trust, but with heartbreak. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. "Because I was afraid," I admitted. "Afraid of losing you, afraid of breaking you, afraid of facing the truth myself. But baby, the one thing I was never afraid of was loving you. That has always been real." She pulled back, her face blotchy and wet. "So who am I, Grandma? If I'm not Mama's baby, then who am I?" I cupped her face, my own tears falling freely. "You're Grace. My Grace. The girl I rocked to sleep. The girl I prayed over. The girl who brought light back into my world after I lost Lily. Your blood doesn't change that. Nothing ever will." That night, Grace didn't eat dinner. She didn't speak to me. She went to her room and closed the door. I sat in the kitchen, staring at her untouched plate, my heart breaking all over again. I had told her the truth. I had done what was right. But right didn't always mean easy. And as much as it hurt, I knew this was only the beginning. The revelation had come. Now came the rebuilding or the breaking, the morning after. Grace learned the truth. The house felt like a stranger's home. Her bedroom door stayed shut. No music played. No footsteps pounded down the hall like they always did when she rushed to get ready for school. When she finally emerged, didn't look at me. She walked past the kitchen, grabbed her bag, and muttered, "I'll eat at school." Her words sliced sharper than a knife. For 14 years, I had made her breakfast. Pancakes shaped like hearts, scrambled eggs with too much cheese, biscuits on Fridays. Now, she couldn't even meet my eyes. I sat at the table long after she left, staring at her empty chair. This was the price of truth. Over the next week, Grace spoke to me only when she had to. Yes, no, fine. I don't know. I caught her staring in the mirror, touching her hair, tracing her face as though searching for someone else's reflection. Once I found her on the porch with Lily's photo in her lap, tears streaking her cheeks. My heart ached to comfort her, but every time I reached out, she pulled back. It was like losing Lily all over again. Then came Daniel. He called me late one night, his voice smooth as ever, dripping with false concern. "I heard Grace found out," he said, as though the gossip reached him on the wind. "That must be hard on her. Hard on you too. Maybe it's time she comes to live with me." Rage boiled in my chest. "Don't you dare. You lost that right the day you betrayed her and Lily." He chuckled, low and cruel. "Come on, Margaret. She's not even your blood. Do you really think a teenager is going to stick around once she realizes the truth? She wants answers. She wants her real family. And who else can give her that but me?" My grip tightened on the phone. "You don't want family, Daniel. You want control. You always did. But I'll tell you this, Grace is mine." I raised her. I dried her tears, bandaged her knees, taught her how to walk in this world. You think you can erase that? You're dead wrong. But after I hung up, doubt crept in. What if Daniel was right? What if Grace left me? 2 nights later, Grace confronted me. "I want to see him," she said flatly. My stomach dropped. "Grace, you don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking," she snapped. "You kept everything from me, my whole life. Maybe he'll tell me the truth." My truth. Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they carried Lily's fire, the same fierce independence that had once made her fall for Daniel in the first place. I wanted to scream no. I wanted to lock the doors and protect her from him forever. But I couldn't. Because part of loving someone, truly loving them, was letting them walk into the storm, even when you'd rather shield them from the rain. So I nodded, my voice breaking. "All right, baby. But if you're going to see him, I'm coming too." Grace crossed her arms, her chin high. "Fine." And just like that, the next battle began. The cafe smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon, but my stomach was too tight to eat. Grace sat across from me, her arms folded, her eyes darting toward the door every time it opened. And then he walked in, Daniel, tall, polished, wearing that same confident smile he'd used to charm Lily all those years ago. Time had lined his face, but his arrogance hadn't aged a day. "Grace," he said warmly, striding toward us. "My God, you've grown into a beautiful young woman." Grace stood, hesitant, but drawn like a moth to a flame. Daniel hugged her, and for a moment, she let him. I felt my heart twist. When he finally sat down, his eyes slid to me. "Margaret," he said it like a challenge. "Daniel," my voice was steady, but inside I was a storm. He turned his attention back to Grace, his tone soft, almost fatherly. "I've wanted to see you for so long. You deserve to know the truth about who you are." Grace leaned in. "Then tell me, who am I? Who were my real parents?" Daniel hesitated just enough for me to notice. Then he smiled, slick and rehearsed. "Your mother was someone very dear to me. She couldn't raise you, but she loved you. I made sure you were safe. That's why you ended up with Margaret." Lies. Smooth, poisonous lies. I slammed my hand on the table before I could stop myself. "Don't you dare twist this, Daniel. Tell her the truth. Tell her you stole her from the woman she was meant to belong to." His eyes darkened. "Careful, Margaret. You always did have a flair for drama." Grace looked between us, her face pale. "Is she telling the truth?" Daniel leaned back, sighing as though burdened by secrets too heavy to carry. "Sweetheart, there are always 2 sides to every story. Margaret means well, but she's bitter. I wanted to protect you, to give you a better life. I didn't think she could. The audacity made my blood boil. You didn't want to protect her, Daniel. You wanted to cover your tracks. You let my daughter die, and then you stole her child to keep your reputation clean. Grace gasped, her hands trembling. Daniel's mask cracked for just a second. His jaw tightened. His eyes hardened. You've poisoned her against me her whole life, he spat. But now she's old enough to decide for herself. He turned to Grace, his voice suddenly gentle again. You don't have to live in Margaret's shadow anymore. You can come with me. I'll give you everything you've ever wanted. Grace stared at him, her lip quivering. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might say yes. But then she looked at me, and in that instant, I knew she remembered every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every lullaby I'd sung, every prayer I'd whispered over her. Her voice was small, but steady. I already have everything I need. Daniel froze. Grace, no, she cut him off, tears welling in her eyes. You lied? You used me. Grandma raised me. She's the only parent I've ever had. And you're nothing to me. My heart nearly burst. Daniel's face twisted in rage. But before he could say another word, Grace grabbed my hand. Let's go, Grandma. And just like that. We walked out together, but as we stepped into the sunlight, I knew it wasn't over, Daniel. Wasn't the kind of man to lose quietly, and the real fight was just beginning. I thought walking out of that cafe meant the end of Daniel's hold over us. I was wrong. It was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled across the front. Inside were court papers, petition for custody of Grace. My hands trembled as I read them. Daniel was claiming I was unfit, that I'd withheld Grace's true identity and manipulated her out of selfishness. He painted himself as the noble father figure swooping in to save a child from my supposed lies. I sank into the kitchen chair, the paper rattling in my hand. He was going to drag us through the mud, and he had money, lawyers, connections. But what he didn't have was truth. Grace found me at the table, pale and shaking. Grandma, what is it? I couldn't hide it. I slid the papers toward her. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. He's trying to take me away from you. Yes, baby, I whispered, my voice breaking. But he won't win. I promise you, he won't. She set her jaw, fire flashing in her eyes. Then we'll fight together. The weeks that followed were hell. Daniel spread rumors through town that I was unstable, that I'd kept Grace's parentage hidden out of spite, that I had no right to her. Reporters even showed up at my door, shoving microphones in my face, asking if I'd stolen Grace. I wanted to crumble. I wanted to crawl back into the safety of silence. But then I remembered my mama's words. The world hands you a bad harvest. Plant something new. So I planted truth. I went to a lawyer, a young woman named Marisol, who had a fire in her soul I recognized. She listened, eyes fierce, as I laid out everything. The switch at the hospital, Lily's death, Daniel's lies. She leaned forward, her hand firm on mine. Margaret, this isn't just a case. This is justice. We're not just going to defend you, we're going to expose him. Those words gave me strength. I didn't know I had, but Daniel wasn't finished. One night, I came home to find my front door ajar. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. Grace's room was ransacked, drawers pulled out, clothes scattered. On her bed sat a single photo frame face down. When I picked it up, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of Grace and me from years ago. Across it, in black marker, was scrawled, "She belongs to me." I dropped it, my hands shaking. He wasn't just fighting in court. He was trying to break us, that night. Grace crawled into my bed, her body trembling. Grandma, what if he wins? I held her close, brushing her hair back like I had when she was little. Baby, listen to me. He can throw money, lies, and threats. But he doesn't have what we have. He doesn't have love. And love will always win. She buried her face in my chest, and I whispered, no matter what happens, you're mine. That's a truth no judge, no man, no devil can take away. But deep down, I knew the battle was only heating up. Daniel had declared war and was ready to fight like hell. Walking into that courthouse felt like going onto a stage I'd never auditioned for. My palms were slick, my shoes scuffed from pacing the floor at home for nights on end. The building smelled of old varnish and lemon cleaner. Reporters clustered near the steps. Neighbors I'd known my whole life peered through the doors with eyes that said a dozen things at once. Sympathy, gossip, curiosity. Grace squeezed my hand when we sat down on the bench. She looked small against the polished wood, but there was a set to her jaw that made me proud. She was 19 older than the little girl who'd first toddled into my kitchen, and yet inside, I could still see the child I'd rocked at night. I wanted to hold her in my arms and tell her we were going to be okay. Instead, gave her a quick smile and tried to breathe slow. Marisol arrived with a stack of manila folders and the sort of confidence you only get when you've read every rule and prepared for the worst. Alina sat behind us like a sentinel, my private investigator friend. And the woman who'd spent months pulling smoke out from corners I didn't even know existed. She dug up the hospital records, tracked down nurses, pulled phone logs, and found paper trails that smelled like money and cover-ups. Every miracle I could possibly need had come from her stubbornness. Across the courtroom, Daniel sat with his lawyer. He wore the same expensive suit he'd always worn, the one that whispered power. He looked nothing like the boy who'd once idled in the diner parking lot. Now he had a presence that made other people move aside. But when I looked at him, I saw the man who had made choices terrible. Deliberate choices that cost me my daughter and tried to steal my granddaughter. I had nothing but contempt and a terrible, hungry determination. The judge called the courtroom to order. Cameras were kept at bay. But the tension felt like it would burst through the polished benches regardless. Mark, S.O.L., started by laying out the bones of our case. Your Honor, she said, we will show that the petitioner, Daniel Whitmore, did not act to protect a child. He acted to protect his own interests. He orchestrated a baby exchange at the time of Ms. Holloway's daughter's death, allowed Ms. Holloway to raise a child under false pretenses, then attempted to take custody when it became convenient. It sounded clinical when she said it, but the air in the room changed. She called witnesses in an order she'd chosen carefully, people who could knit a story together without fantastical leaps. First, the retired nurse, Mrs. Keller. It's been there the night Lily delivered. Mrs. Keller shuffled in slowly. But when she testified, she was clearer than any textbook. It was hectic, she said. There were 2 babies, born close together. Mr. Whitmore was there, agitated. I remember thinking his manner wasn't that of a man grieving. There was more calculation than sorrow. Daniel's team tried to make her look confused, to plant doubt about her memory. But she had records to back parts of her recollection. And Alina had corroborating notes, shift logs, and a note someone had written and later tried to scrub. Mrs. Keller's testimony was a soft blow, then a harder one. Next, Alina took the stand. She was cool and precise, turning over the stacks of documents for the judge to see. There were the duplicated entries in the hospital ledger, signatures that had been altered, a supervisor who'd retired with an odd payout in his last check. Alina explained how the paper trail led straight to the Whitmore legal office, the same one Daniel still used. The courtroom murmured. I felt a heat rush up my neck. Then Marisol did something Daniel's lawyers didn't expect. She played the recording. It was a simple thing, a voice message with Daniel's clipped tone from months ago when we'd managed to capture when he thought he was talking in private. On it, his words were damning. We'll swap them. No one will ever know. My mother will be furious if word gets out. We can keep the one that fits and bury the rest. The sound hit like a second body blow. Daniel's face went white. The lawyer sputtered an objection, but the judge allowed it as evidence, noting it was relevant to the petition. Daniel's defense tried to portray him as a confused young man, forced into a decision by circumstances. His lawyer painted his family as a pillar of the community, the kind of people who made tough, if harsh, calls to preserve the family name. They called their own witnesses an administrator who'd signed some forms and who insisted they'd been procedural. Nothing more. And a psychologist who testified about the chaos of grief and how people sometimes do irrational things. It was all well-rehearsed theater, but the edge that pushed the court leaned our way. DNA results. Authenticated and clear. Emily Lily's real daughter was present in the courtroom for part of the proceedings, a quiet, dignified presence who had come forward months earlier with questions that led us to the files in the first place. The results showed what we had prayed and feared. Grace's DNA did not match Lily's. Emily's did. It wasn't conjecture. It was science. Daniel's lawyer tried to spin it. Oh, DNA can be interpreted. But you can't argue with a laboratory stamp and a chain of custody verified by county officials. The evidence lined up like soldiers in a parade. Dates, signatures, recordings. Testimonies dot throughout the trial. Grace sat white-knuckled beside me. There were moments she'd look down at the papers, press close, then look up with eyes that begged answers. When it was my turn to speak, my voice felt borrowed. Like it belonged to someone braver than I felt. But I had to do it. I stood and walked slowly to the witness box. The judge asked me to state my relationship to Grace. She's my granddaughter, I said simply. She's also the girl I raised from the first breath she ever took. I loved her from the bone. I did it because Lily asked me to. Lily looked at me in those last minutes and said, "Take care of her." Mama, I promised her I would. I told the court about the nights I'd sat up feeding. The time Grace had high fever and I'd driven her to the ER at 3 a.m. How I'd sewn her costumes and slapped bandages on skinned knees. I told them about the day I'd learned the truth and the spring that had opened in my chest with equal parts grief and clarity. There were tears from the gallery. A woman we'd helped once during a bake sale I ran was sniffing quietly. The judge kept his face neutral. Impartiality wore well on him, but I saw understanding in his eyes. Daniel testified last. He sat rigid and controlled, and when it was his turn, he read from a statement his lawyers had prepared. He said he'd made mistakes. He said he had thought he was protecting his child from scandal. He mumbled something about pressure and fear. He apologized in a way that felt rehearsed. When cross-examined, he crumbled a little, voice-taught answers patchy. The recording was played back to him in court, and his face turned hard and angry. "You think I'm the monster here," he said finally, his voice low. "But you don't know what kind of family I come from. We do what we must." Marisol looked at him like someone who'd been given a liar's map and was ready to trace the falsehoods. "We do what we must," she said. "We threaten, we cover up, and when the law catches up, we invoke fear to protect ourselves. That's not moral action. That's cowardice. You covered up a death and pretended to mourn while you planned to hide a child to save your pride." There was a quiet after that, the kind of silence that preludes thunder. Daniel's lawyer tried last-minute theatrics. Bring up my age. Suggest that a jury might think a 58-year-old grandmother unfit. Hint that Grace needed the resources Daniel could provide. It was ugly and transparent and, frankly, insulting. I felt anger rise hot as coals, but Marisol smoothed it into a pointed rebuttal. Proof of income. Support networks, testimonials from parents at Grace's school. From the pastor who'd watched me hold Grace through so many scrapes and scoldings. She showcased receipts from Lily's table, my small catering venture, and bank statements showing steady income. She put a face on what stability meant. It wasn't a mansion. It was late-night phone calls, packed lunches, and the smell of biscuits baking on weekday mornings. After days of testimony and cross-examination that made me feel like a puppet pulled by someone else's strings. The judge retired to his chambers. We waited in a hush that dug at my nerves until his gavel finally sounded again. After reviewing the evidence, he said, "This court recognizes the weight and depth of Ms. Holloway's caregiving history and finds that her bond with Grace is profound and established. Further evidence indicates that Ms. Holloway was the lawful guardian placed in the role of caregiver. Following the tragic circumstances of Ms. Reynolds' death, given the preponderance of evidence of wrongful infant substitution and the actions of the petitioner to misrepresent facts, this court denies the petition for custody by Mr. Whitmore. A breath I didn't realize. I've been holding escaped me in one gulp. Grace sobbed loud and unashamed. And I gathered her into my arms as a rush of neighbors and quiet friends stood to applaud softly. Daniel's face looked like something hollowed out. But the judge's statement continued in a voice that tempered relief with realism. This court, however, acknowledges the complexity of this case and orders a full, independent investigation into the hospital's procedures and the parties involved. Any criminal referrals arising from this investigation will be handled by appropriate law enforcement. Furthermore, the petitioner may appeal this decision, so it wasn't absolute victory. Appeals hung like clouds on the horizon. Investigations promised more noise to come. Daniel could drag this through courts and media for months, even years. But the ruling swung the door back in our favor. It didn't slam it shut on the rest of the world. It gave us standing, and in the legal sense, that mattered. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I answered a few questions, short, honest. I raised the girl I loved, I said simply. We'll keep loving her and protecting her. The cameras flashed. The community neighbors who'd seen me change bandages by dim bedside lamps gathered and hugged. A woman pressed warm loaves of bread into my hands. A man from the church handed over cash for legal fees. The town wanted to help stitch our life back together. That night, when we walked home under a sky the color of copper pennies, Grace leaned into me and said, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I was mad at you before, but I see now you did what you thought was right." I kissed the top of her head and told her, "You have every right to be mad. I won't argue that. But know this, love isn't a ledger. It doesn't count by bloodlines. It counts by the nights we stayed up, the scraped knees we soothed, the times we said, 'I'm here, baby, no matter what.' We had won a critical battle. But the war of public opinion and potential legal appeals wasn't over. Daniel might appeal. The hospital's shadowy corners could still hide surprises. There would be depositions, subpoenas, and more nights of waiting with the phone beside my bed. Still, it was a victory that mattered. Not because it put Daniel in his place alone, but because it validated what I'd known all along. The life I'd given Grace was real. The comfort, the dinners, the songs, the hard lessons, they couldn't be erased by a legal brief or a man's. Pride. We went to bed that night exhausted, but with a steadying peace. I prayed in the dark, nothing fancy, just a raw, grateful whisper. Thank you. Keep us steady. Help me to be the woman my Lily would have been proud of. Because even though the judge had ruled our way, I knew the fight to rebuild trust, to help Grace heal, and to face down whatever appeals or new revelations might come was only beginning. The courtroom had given us a reprieve, not a final end. And if there's one thing I've learned in my 58 years, it's this. When you've stood through storms before, you stand again. You take the victories you can, okay? And you keep moving forward one careful step at a time. The courthouse victory should have felt like an ending, but it wasn't. It was more like the pulling of a thorn, painful, messy, but necessary before true healing could begin. Grace and I walked out of that courtroom together. But our steps were uncertain. We didn't talk much on the ride home. She stared out the window, her reflection caught in the glass. And I kept both hands on the wheel, trying not to cry, because as much as the judge's words gave me relief, I knew the wound between us wasn't fixed by a gavel. It had been cut by years of secrets. That first week, we lived like guests in each other's home. We said good morning, good night, and not much else. Grace went to school, worked her part-time job, and spent most evenings holed up in her room. I cooked dinner and left plates at her door. Sometimes the food went untouched. One night I couldn't stand it anymore. I knocked softly and asked, "Baby, can we talk?" She didn't answer at first. When she finally opened the door, her eyes were swollen and red. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "You tell me one thing, the court says another, and that man," she stopped, choking on the words. "What if I don't belong anywhere?" I pulled her into my arms. "Listen to me, Grace. You belong here. With me, you always will. Blood might make us related, but love is what makes us family. And I love you more than my own life. She cried into my shoulder for a long time, and when she finally pulled back, she looked years older. Then help me figure out how to live with this, she said. That became our new project. Healing. We started small. Walks around the neighborhood. Coffee on the porch before school. Family dinners where we didn't talk about Court or Daniel or even Lily. Just ordinary things. Grace's art projects. My baking orders. A stray cat that kept showing up on the back step. I could see the walls she'd built begin to loosen. Brick by brick. One evening, she surprised me by saying, "Grandma, can I help with your catering this weekend?" My heart swelled. I handed her an apron, and we spent hours rolling dough and frosting cupcakes side by side. She laughed for the first time in months when she accidentally spilled powdered sugar all over the floor. "Looks like a snowstorm in here," I teased. She grinned. And for that one moment, the house felt alive again. But healing wasn't just about laughter. It was also about facing the scars. We started therapy together, something I never thought I'd do at nearly 60. Sitting in a counselor's office, I admitted things I had buried for decades. The guilt of not protecting Lily, the fear of losing Grace, the resentment I carried toward Daniel. Grace admitted her anger toward me, her confusion, her need to understand where she came from without feeling like she was betraying me. Some sessions left us raw and quiet on the drive home. Others gave us ways to talk without shouting, ways to listen without interrupting. Slowly, we learned to breathe again in each other's presence. Meanwhile, Daniel wasn't done. He filed an appeal just as Marisol had warned he might. The paperwork alone cost me sleep. The whispers around town returned. People who had hugged me outside the courthouse now looked at me like I was part of a soap opera. But this time, I didn't crumble. Instead, I poured my fear into work. I expanded Lily's table from just catering small events to teaching baking classes at the community center. At first, it was just a handful of retirees who wanted to learn how to make pie crust without fear. Then it grew widows, single mothers, even a few teenagers looking for part-time skills. The classes weren't just about food. They became about survival, about proving that age or circumstance didn't end. It reshaped us. One evening after class, a woman my age pulled me aside with tears in her eyes. "I thought my life ended when my husband left. But seeing you starting over at your age, it gives me hope." Her words stuck with me. Maybe that was my purpose now, not just to raise Grace, but to show women like me that survival was possible. Even when life tore your foundation apart, Grace began coming to the classes too. Sometimes she baked beside me, other times she painted in the corner, sketching portraits of the women kneading dough. She even started selling some of her art online. Using the money to buy her own supplies, we were learning together how to build something new out of the ruins. One night, as we sat on the porch with steaming mugs of tea, Grace turned to me and said, "Grandma, do you ever think about what Mom would say if she saw us now?" I blinked back tears. "All the time, baby. And you know what I think?" "What?" "That she'd be proud of us. Not because everything turned out perfect, but because we didn't give up. We found a way to keep going." Grace nodded slowly, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "Then that's what I want too. To keep going. To live in a way Mom would be proud of." That night, I wrote in my journal something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about survival, about betrayal, about rebuilding. And at the bottom of the page, I wrote one sentence that carried me forward. "The baby I raised may not have been my grandchild by blood, but she is my family by love. And no court, no man, no betrayal will ever take that away." I thought we had finally found our footing. Grace was healing. Lily's table was growing. And for the first time in years, my house was filled with more laughter than silence. But peace, it seems, is something Daniel couldn't stand to see me have. The notice came on a gray. Tuesday morning notice of appeal. Daniel wasn't letting go. He wanted a second trial, claiming the first was biased. That new evidence proved his rights as Grace's father. Grace sat at the kitchen table, her cereal untouched. The papers spread between us. "Grandma," she whispered, her hands clenched into fists. Why won't he stop? I reached across the table, holding her trembling fingers in mine. Because men like him don't know how to lose. But baby, I promise you this will make sure he loses for good. Marisala, lawyer with fire in her eyes, leaned back in her chair when we met that afternoon. He's playing dirty Margaret. He's claiming you manipulated hospital records the night Lily died. If the court buys it, they could reopen custody questions. The room spun for a moment. Hospital records. That night had been a blur of grief and chaos. If Daniel had gotten his hands on something altered, forged, whatever, it could be dangerous. But Marisol wasn't rattled. Let him come. We'll be ready. The day of the appeal hearing, the courthouse felt colder than ever. Daniel strutted in with his expensive suit and smug grin, flanked by a new lawyer who looked like he'd been pulled from a TV drama. Grace sat beside me, shoulders squared, her hand in mine. She wasn't the scared little girl anymore. She was my partner in this fight. Daniel's lawyer opened with venom. Your Honor, the respondent has lied about the child's parentage for years. We have proof that hospital files were tampered with, proof that she orchestrated a cover-up. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch, because I knew the truth. When it was our turn, Marisol stood tall. Your Honor, this so-called evidence is fabricated, and we can prove it. Not only that, but Mr. Daniel Whitaker has a history of falsifying records in financial matters, which directly undermines his credibility. Then came the twist I'll never forget. Marisol called a surprise witness. Alina Vargas, the private investigator I'd worked with months before. She strode to the stand with a folder in hand. I was hired to dig into Mr. Whitaker's activities. What I found was a pattern. Forged contracts, hidden accounts, threats made to former employees. And this, she held up a document. Is the metadata showing these hospital files were edited from Mr. Whitaker's own office? Computer. Daniel's face went pale. The judge leaned forward, eyes like steel. Mr. Whitaker, do you deny this? Daniel stammered. His lawyer sputtered. But it was too late. The truth was out. The gavel struck like thunder. Custody remains with Mrs. Reynolds. The appeal is dismissed. Mr. Whitaker, you are ordered to cease all harassment or face contempt charges. Relief crashed over me in waves. Grace burst into tears, throwing her arms around me. I held her tight, whispering, It's over, baby. It's really over. But it wasn't just victory. It was freedom. After the hearing, Daniel tried to corner me in the hallway. His eyes were wild, his voice low. You think you've won, Maggie? You ruined me. I met his gaze, steady and calm. No, Daniel, you ruined yourself. All I did was stop you from ruining her. For the first time, he had no words. He just turned and walked away, smaller than I had ever seen him that night. Grace and I sat on the porch watching the stars. Grandma, she said softly, does this mean we're finally safe? I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Yes, baby. Safe and stronger than we've ever been. We sat there in silence. The night air cool on our faces, both of us breathing freely for the first time in what felt like forever. In that moment, I realized something. The baby I raised wasn't my grandchild by blood, but she was the reason I had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and fear. And she wasn't just my granddaughter. She was my victory. Life after the courtroom was quieter, at least on the surface. No more lawyers, no more threats in the mail. No more whispered rumors chasing us down the grocery aisle, but inside me, something had shifted. For 60 years, I'd thought survival meant just keeping my head down, pushing through storms until the skies cleared. But after Daniel, after losing Lily, after almost losing Grace, I realized survival wasn't enough. We deserved more than surviving. We deserved to thrive. It started small. Women in town began stopping me at church, in the bakery, at the post office. You're stronger than I'd ever be, one widow told me. How did you not give up? Another asked, tears in her eyes. At first, I didn't know what to say. But then I remembered how alone I'd felt when everything came crashing down. And I decided no woman in my shoes should ever feel that way again. So I started sharing. Not just the polished version, but the messy truth, the mistakes. The nights I thought I'd break. The mornings I had to drag myself out of bed for Grace's sake. And to my surprise, people listened that the community center director invited me to speak after one of my baking classes. "Just tell your story, Margaret," she urged. "These women need to hear it." So I stood up in that linoleum-floored room, hands trembling, and I spoke. I told them about Lily's death, about raising Grace, about the betrayal that nearly broke us and the wisdom that saved us. I told them what I'd learned the hard way. That age doesn't make us irrelevant. That the lessons life carves into us are tools, not scars. That even when betrayal knocks us flat, we can stand again stronger. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then women stood, clapping, some crying, some hugging me, and that was the moment I knew my pain had a purpose. Soon, invitations came from other towns, then from women's groups in bigger cities. Before long, Grace and I were traveling together, me giving talks, her selling her artwork in the back of the room. Every time I stood on a stage, I looked out at those faces lined with years, etched with sorrow and joy, and I told them the same thing I'm telling you now. Your scars are your strength. Don't hide them. Don't waste them. Use them. They are proof you survived on. They're the very wisdom that will carry you through whatever storm comes next. Grace flourished, too. She got into art school, her talent blooming. Sometimes she even joined me on stage, sharing her side of the story. The audience always leaned forward when she spoke because she was living proof of what resilience could build. One night, after a long talk in Dallas, Grace and I sat in our hotel room, tired but happy. She looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen since she was little. "Grandma," she said, "do you ever wish things had turned out differently? That Mom had lived? That I'd been your granddaughter by blood?" Tears filled my eyes, but I smiled. "Of course, I wish Lily had lived. Not a day goes by that I don't. But baby, I wouldn't trade you for the world. Blood or no blood, you are mine. You always will be." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I knew she believed me. Now at 62, I sit here speaking to you, the women watching, the sisters listening, the warriors who've survived more than you let the world see. If you're feeling broken, if you're wondering if it's too late to start over, hear me. It is never too late. The betrayal that was meant to bury me became the soil I grew from. The lies that were meant to destroy me became the stage I speak from. And the baby I, Roz, the one who wasn't my grandchild by blood, became the greatest gift of my life. So to every woman watching, don't you dare count yourself out. Don't you dare believe the lie that your best days are behind you. You are stronger than you. Think you are wiser than you know. And the life you've lived, the good, the bad, the heartbreaking, isn't wasted. It's your weapon. It's your story. Use it. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. And remember, ladies together, we don't just survive, we triumph.